Good day, Sir Blasphemy here for Sir Blasphemy's Travels. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Another video from home right now, not a lot going on for me, so I'm just trying to keep you guys up to date with stuff I know, maybe helpful tips and things of that nature. For some of you Renaissance Fair folks and for some of my metalhead friends out there that have enjoyed some of my old bands videos, I'll be doing more musical stuff too as well on this channel as well. So anyway, today I wanted to get into something. So I had been asked a lot of questions in the comments. I had mentioned basically my Renaissance story, horror story, and I went into some detail, but I didn't go into great detail about what happened to me when I hired someone and really regretted that decision doing that with this particular individual. That's in, I forget which video, but I'll find it and I'll post it up above. But yeah, so what I'm doing this video about today is maybe just, I want to tell you my horror story in the full detail, the way that it happened, and hopefully it might help vendors out there, new and old, to know what to kind of look for when dealing with a risky employee. You know, and if I wish I was also an employee there at times so I could also do videos about having a risky employer, because there's risky employers there too for you employees out there. But today is just about my bad experience when I hired a certain individual, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you the whole story because I've had those questions and I've been asked, like, what was the whole story? Like, how did this come to be? So, and I, would kind of glaze over the top of it in comments, but I'll give you more details here. So anyway, so this story was about my first season at Scarborough Renaissance Festival, just outside of the Dallas, Texas area. And so I, at the time, was also, I was a supervisor for a company where I live, and I could only be gone for a certain amount of time. And so I needed to go out there, set it up, get everything right, and come back and have somebody run it for me. So I did everything that you're supposed to do in the beginning. So the first thing I did is I talked to a couple of people, and I used some of the Facebook resources and things like that. And finally, a couple of people applied. I started out first for a lady, and she was supposed to do it for me, and then she bailed out, and I had to look again. So I kept having people bail out. That was a lot of what was going on. And all I needed was someone to be my booth manager. They needed to do the daily operations of the booth, keep it clean, all that stuff that you're supposed to do, and then also do my bank deposits. And so, it needed to be somebody that was trustworthy. It needed to be somebody that, could handle that. And so finally I came across a gentleman, I dare call him a gentleman, but I came across somebody that was like, yes, I've done Renaissance fairs before, I've done this, please check my references. So I called his two references that he gave me, and one was a lady that did like psychic work, and she said, she was an older lady, said, oh yeah, he was great for getting people in, and da-da-da-da, and I was like, okay, great, he was good at hawking. And then secondly, I called the other person who did like who ran like a food booth, which was basically what I was doing, and he was like, yeah, he's good at getting sales done, but he talks a lot, and he's like, you kind of have to watch for that. Which I'm a bit of a talker, so I kind of said, okay, well, I can deal with that. I thought I was a talker. This guy put me to shame anyway. So I said, all right. So I told the guy, I said, okay, yeah, you're I'll go ahead and hire you. This is what we need to do. When we get there, I need to be able to, we got to train you fast, and I'll show you where, the bank is at, and you got to make these deposits, and you have to make them each and every Monday. And so he's like, yeah, okay, no problem. And so, and I noticed he was it was funny, over the phone, he didn't talk that much. And I was like, he almost seemed like he was disinterested to some degree when you talk to him over the phone. So I was like, well, he doesn't really talk that much. So anyway, I load up my stuff, I get there, I get everything set up, I meet him, and then I started to realize, wow, this guy does talk a lot. I mean, he just talked nonstop. He didn't shut up. He talked about himself mostly, and he was, when you were trying to have a conversation, a sharing of ideas, you'd be talking about, certain things. He would cut you off every single time you spoke. You'd have to like force in what you're going to say real quick because you knew he was going to cut you off. And then he would almost try to like outshine you, like he knew more than you. about every single topic. You could talk about music, you could talk about shopping, you could talk about anything, and he would interrupt you and talk over the top. And that was 90% of the time. So I got to the point where I really didn't want to talk to him that often because he would just interrupt you, and then he would try to like, outdo you, so to speak. So anyway, so I was getting to know him through that. So like the first couple of weekends I was there at Scarborough, and I was training him, and some of the things that I was noticing was he had these bongos, which was fine. He was out there, he was getting people, he's beating on the bongos, and he'd come in, and I'd have to remind him, I'd go, Jace, you got to come in, don't stand out there all day. You got to come in, and, we got to ring people up, you got to talk to people, got to engage people, which he was good at. And and he was exceptionally loud, which is fine. I don't mind loud. I'm kind of loud, and he was louder than me, but I still didn't mind that. I didn't mind that he was still a bit of a talker and things like that. So anyway, so I was showing him how to do things, showing him how to do the system and everything. And some of the little tiny red flags that I got in the beginning was, I'd be like, hey, he would stand around, and I go, Jace, I need you to sweep out the booth. People are tracking in, mud and dirt in here. Please sweep it out. Please, make sure you're doing this daily. Please wipe down counters. Please do this. Please do that. I was constantly having to remind him of that, So finally the time came when I had to leave. And so when I left, the next weekend came up of the fair, and I was like, what's going on? I was like, I noticed immediately that during the time frames where I was there the previous couple of weeks, we were making more on Saturdays and Sundays in certain, time frame blocks. There was this pattern. There's always a pattern, usually, as any vendor will tell you. And I was like, wow, he hasn't made a sale in like 2 hours. He hasn't done, and I'm going, what's going on, So I'd call him and I'd go, hey man, is it just like, oh yeah, it's slow. And what was funny though, is a lot of the times I would text him or call him as the owner of the business, and he wouldn't respond to me. And I'd have to call him, and I'd be like, hey man, I need you to answer your phone. I need to know what's going on there. Why is business so slow? And so, he goes, oh, well, it's a slow weekend. So I didn't think that much of it. I said, well, that's possible. It could be, slow weekend. It happens, whatever. And this was like shortly after COVID anyway. And so I was like, maybe, people went and experienced it for a couple weekends and nobody else is getting out. So then the next weekend came up, which I believe was weekend 4. And I noticed the same pattern, except this time I'm going to get a hold of him, and he's saying, oh, well, the system's down. The Square system's down, which is something that rarely happens. And I was like, okay. And I was like, here's what you got to do to troubleshoot it, do all this. And it would be down. He's like, I'm just taking, deals, by hand. I can't do card and da-da-da-da-da. And this was consistently happening over the whole course while he was there by himself, by the way. That's something that never happens to me. Once in a blue moon, the system might go down for just a little bit, 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then it comes right back up. That's all I've ever experienced, maybe twice in an entire run at a fair. But he was having this happen several times a day, and I couldn't figure out, why is this happening? It didn't happen while I was there, but yet now it's happening all the time and a lot during the day. And I would notice, I would look into the system, I'd look into the sales, and I would notice the same kind of pattern. And then I started to notice, wait a minute, if, as any vendor out there knows, Saturdays, 99.9% of the time are the higher sale day than Sundays. And I was like, why are we doing better, which wasn't that good, on Sunday than over Saturday? Every weekend that he's there consistently. And I couldn't figure out, I was like, what's going on? Something's not right, after weekend 4. And I would talk to him or whatever. And oh, well, it's slow, there's just not as many people, blah, 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 blah. He kept giving me the same excuse. The system was down, da, 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 da. He kept saying that, and I was going, all right. So weekend 5 comes across. And this is where I started really going, all right, I'm really going to watch what happens. And sure enough, the sales patterns remain the same. It was like the morning I would be at almost no dollars, which was ridiculous, the first 3 or 4 hours of the day, and then all of a sudden it would creep up a little bit. And I'm going, what is going on there? This is not normal. This is not normal. Normally, there's a little bit of a slow start when you're selling chocolate and stuff like that. It takes till later in the day, granted, but this was going on longer, and then the periods of the gaps of sales weren't like having big runs. There wasn't really runs, and I was like, there's always runs. Every time there's always a run. It's a rarity that you don't get like a sales run, and he wasn't getting them, and I was like, what's going on? So I'd be contacting him. He wouldn't answer his phone. He would text you back a couple hours later, and you're trying to find out what's going on. So at this point, I'm highly suspicious about what's going on. And then I get a call on a Monday, and this guy, this is true, I don't think I've mentioned this before, this guy is standing at my Wells Fargo with me on the phone. Okay, he calls me. He goes, they won't let me deposit your money here, Mike. And I was like, well, I guess I have to give him permission. He's like, I've done it the past couple of weekends, but they're not letting me, blah, blah, blah. And he's screaming, and I can hear him yelling at the people behind the counter. I'm like, Jace, stop, dude, that's my bank. I do business. Quit yelling at them. Quit doing this, dude. What are you doing? Like, stop yelling at them. And his name was Jace. His name was Jace Rishu, by the way. So vendors, be careful. Don't hire this guy. I'm trying to do my best not to mention his name because I've mentioned it in other videos. But his name is Jace Rishu. Don't hire that guy. Trust me. He got kicked out of Colorado. He's got kicked out of another fair. And he's also been banned from TRF, Texas Renaissance Festival. So don't hire this guy. Anyway, so he's screaming and yelling at the tellers. Why aren't you taking him out? I've been here the past couple of weeks. I'm the booth manager, and I need to make this. Blah. And he's screaming and yelling at them, and I'm like, hey, man, stop, dude. You can't be doing that. And he freaking hangs up on me. He hangs up on me telling him to stop. And so I don't know what happens after that. I try to call him back, and I'm out supervising my business, and he's, he won't answer his phone after this, so I don't know what's going on. Finally, he messages me and says, well, I'll have to keep the deposit. I said, okay, well, until I get back there, keep the deposits with you in a safe spot. Do not leave them laying around anywhere. Put them in a safe spot as possible. Okay. So then weekend 6 goes by, same sales pattern happens. It was funny how the numbers of sales, you could look when I was there the first 2 weeks, and then you looked at the next 4 weeks, as it always stayed within a certain dollar range. That almost never happens. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. But like, if you were supposed to make, $1,668 that day, if that was your average, it would always hover around 1668. It would, or whatever, I'm just making up numbers just to kind of give you a point, but it always would stay around that number, and I couldn't figure out what is going on. And then Sunday would come along, and Sunday would beat Saturday every time, and I was going, that never happens. What's going on here? So finally, we go back. It's time to go back to clean up, end of the season, and we get there. We let him know that we're going to be there. First of all, of course, he knows that we're coming. So we get there, we open up the booth, and I'm not joking when I say this. I walked into this booth, and there were pizza boxes stacked a mile high behind my counters. For anybody to see, any kind of customer to come in and see, they were stacked a mile high with food still in it. There were rats and rat droppings because he was leaving the food there all over the place. The place hadn't been dusted or swept out. It was muddy. It was filthy. It was disgusting in there. And I'm going, well, that's part of the reason for the sales right there. It's disgusting in here. And it literally looked like he was just living in there, which is fine if you're a vendor. A lot of people live in their booths while they're at Renaissance Fair. That's not unusual. That happens all the time. I mean, there's living quarters and things like that. I was sleeping in the booth while I was there. But the point is you have to keep it clean and presentable. And he wasn't obviously doing that. So we call him and say, hey, man, you need to get here and clean this up. This is filthy. You need to clean this up. And he's like, oh, I'll be there in a minute. Hours later, he finally shows up, and he's just standing around wanting to talk. Talk is all he's doing. And I'm going, hey, man, and over and over again, you got to clean up. You got to clean up. Hey, you got to clean up. My ex at the time, or my wife at the time, was now my ex, she was like, hey, you need to, come on, man, you need to get a broom. We need to get this clean. Let's get going. Let's get these pizza boxes out of here. This is disgusting, so on and so forth. So me and the ex had decided that, he's going to get fired. That's all there is to it. So once the day started, we went ahead and excused him. And he's like, oh, this is what always happens last weekend, That's what booth owners do. It's like, no, that's not what booth owners do. You're just a sorry employee, we're thinking. And so then I started going, okay, now I'm going to start looking at the inventory that's here. I'm going to start looking at things. So we get into my cooler where I was selling jarred ganache. It was ice cold cooler. And the ganache, will have a shelf time of a good amount of time, and then you have to throw them out. Well, I opened up the cooler and I popped the tops on some of the ganache, and I could tell that he wasn't watching the cooler, wasn't doing anything. There was freaking mold in the ganache. So if anybody would have bought that, they would have saw it, thank goodness, because it was right on the lid and around the top. Luckily they would know not to eat that, thank goodness. But he was essentially having that for sale. He wasn't checking on any of that. So then I got to the candy bars, which the candy bars are resilient, they're fine. And I started looking and I started to go, according to our sales, we should have a lot more candy bars here. And we don't. And then I got into the system and started looking through the system. And then I started to realize the inventory didn't match up to the sales numbers. And I said, what was he doing? So over the course of that weekend, I started using the square as if I was going to rip it off. And I started realizing what he did whenever there was a cash sale. He would get up to the point of to make change, so he'd know how much change to pull out of the register. He'd pull out the change for the register, give them their change, and then pocket the cash money. He wouldn't go to the completion to print them out like a receipt of completion of the sale. If they didn't ask for it, he wouldn't, if they would go, no, I don't want a receipt, he would just top out of it, and it was like the sale didn't happen. What he didn't know is that in Square you can go into and find out how many times that they've went into a certain point and didn't complete the sale, and you can see it. He did it hundreds of times. So I knew then that he was taking the cash sales and he was pocketing the money over the course of a day. But there were other factors too that was strange with him. So when I was giving him his checks, when I was writing his checks, he wasn't cashing them. They weren't going through, they were going 3 or 4 weeks, and I was like, this guy's staying in his tent out there in the field and he's not cashing his checks. Why is he not doing this? Well, that's why. He was getting all the money he needed from my register, from my sales. He was taking that cash and putting it in his pocket. Also, when we came that day, we walked up, and in plain sight, on top of our cooler, sitting there for everybody to see, anybody could have reached over and taken it, was our bank bag with the deposits that he was kind enough to leave some of the cash for us that he didn't take himself, sitting on the cooler. For anybody could have just reached over and just grabbed it and taken off with it. And anybody could have walked into the booth and just taken it. I mean, it's insane to me. So that was my horror story. And what was funny is then I kept him on after I realized, I should have probably thrown his ass in jail, but I didn't. But I will to the next person that does that, I assure you, and there better not be anybody that does that to me, because I will prosecute you to the full extent of the law for sure. This guy just got away with it because I was just like, you know what? I'm going to let him go. It's fine. I'll recover. But what was funny is I let him on. He thought he had a job with me too at the Texas Renaissance Festival. And I let him on and let him on and let him on and let him on to the very last moment. And I said, oh, no, sorry, dude, there ain't no job here. Because I knew then he couldn't get into other fairs around the country. He was already counting on being at that one. And I'd already told TRF, don't let this guy in. And so he had got blocked that year from earning an income. And he has the nerve to send me a text that says, man, I was really counting on that. This is kind of last minute. And I was just like, dude, you ripped me off. What the hell you expect, And then that's the last I've talked to him. What was funny, though, is last season at TRF's, he somehow got by. Their system was working there. And I saw him there. I don't know who he was working for, but he was there. So I'm just telling you, vendors out there at TRF especially, don't hire this guy. TRF has a ban on him. Somehow he slipped through last year. Colorado's banned him completely. And he is banned from Scarborough as well for what he did with me. So that was my horror story. It's something to watch out for, new and old vendors out there. I thought I'd share it with you in greater detail. That was pretty much it. That is all of it, I guess. And, just watch out there, and employees too. Watch out for bad vendors, that don't pay you right or don't, always watch out for yourself too. But that's my horror story. That's what happened with one of my first employees ever. And, hopefully that doesn't happen again. So just to tell you guys out there, if you're the type that does that kind of thing, I will catch you and I will prosecute you. Absolutely. He got his one time get out of jail free card. I let him go. But anyway, that's my horror story of what happened at the Renaissance Fair as a vendor. So I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Thank you for your questions about this and wanting to know more details. So I was glad to share it with you. So, all right, guys, until next time, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and tickle that bell. And that way you get all future notifications from me. And yeah, I would greatly appreciate that. Please feel free to comment. I always comment back 100% of the time. Okay, guys, until next time, Sir Blasphemy, out.